Yeah, so this is a little bit broader than the Five Oaks development. And so the reason we wanted to meet with you outside of that forum is because the concerns are broader than just that specific development. And so
Okay.
what we have is we have representation from a variety of neighbors here in the community. Some of them are Vestavia Hills residents. Some of these properties are adjacent and considering annexation, but all of them are experiencing water related property damage. And the pattern or trend, which you heard at the last planning and zoning meeting last month, is that the water related issues they've really started right about within the last 10 years. There's a high degree of correlation, if not causation, tied to the recent developments in the area. And so this group kind of wanted to talk through, I think there's two main types of or areas of concern. One is during development, whenever there are active developments such as the Five Oaks, or the one up at the old AT&T location. The various controls and silting, because there was a lot of silting that occurred during patchwork, and there are neighborhoods still experiencing issues from that. So the controls during development, which I think are pretty well defined and understood, but then more broadly speaking, the stormwater post-development. And the sort of macro view or regional view to how we ensure that as we do more and more development, it doesn't lead to increased property damage and increased flooding.
Sure.
So that's kind of the context. I don't know if we want to just real quick introduce some folks. We have folks from the Altadena Lake. I think that's Mike and Claude, who've joined us from the Altadena Lake community. Is that right, guys?
Yes.
Nod. Yep. Okay. Cool. We've got Lane Savoy, and he and his wife both spoke at the P&Z committee last time. They're on Caldwell Mill, directly adjacent to the creek. They've spent over $50,000 in installing various water mitigation controls, which were not required on their historic home up until a few years ago, right? So, Lane, I don't know if you wanted to add on to that, but that's you, right?
Yeah, I mean, so again, my perspective is I'm at the bottom of the neighborhood, which is kind of representative of a lot of the new development actually going in, as we know that there's maybe a third of that property is projected floodplain or proposed floodplain according to the survey. So that's kind of representative of my lot. And so as a resident, I would just like to know where you see the future going. And I do think DJ has it right. In addition to, what can we do beyond the minimal controls of what is the guidelines, ADEM, what can Vestavia do if it's not this project, maybe in future projects of development in the area to help protect Altadena Creek? Could we make changes to actually become more proactive in our approach to water controls from an engineering standpoint? Can we raise our standards other than the minimal, because we know the minimal is ineffective? And then secondly, looking at Altadena Creek, what can we do on this development as it's being, I guess, developed? That, I mean, there's some things that just don't make a lot of sense to me that I'd just like to just talk to you about. The volume
Sure.
of water.
Okay.
The volume of water is what I'm concerned about, not really the contents of water.
Right. So, and we'll get to that. So, and then we have Ned, who here, has been trying to protect and improve the overall watershed now for a few decades. Member of the neighborhood. So we have sort of those two different areas of concerns, right? We have members of the lake community who have seen significant silting. At this point, their lake just a few feet deep in most places, and all of that's mostly been driven through the recent development, and they're experiencing increased flooding. I think we have 7 properties adjacent to the lake that have begun to flood in the last decade, to the point where they're endangering real property. You've got Lane, who's unfortunately had significant impacts from patchwork, and those are the folks represented here. So Christopher, you're the engineer for the city, right? And then Lori, if you want to introduce yourself as well. And we can't hear you, Christopher. It doesn't show you as muted, but I can't hear you. Is anyone else?
Can you hear me?
Does that help? Yeah. Am I unmuted now?
Correct.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm Christopher Brady. I'm the city engineer, City of Vestavia Hills. I think I've met a lot of you before. I know Lane and I think Mr. Mudd, I think you might have been at a meeting that we were out there with the developer back in October, maybe. I think it's when we met on site. Lori Beth Kearley's on this call as well too. She's assistant city engineer. She also attended that meeting back in October, I guess, where I felt like we had a fairly good conversation, presentation by the developer and the developer's engineer, I guess, out there on site. So I know some things have changed and it's moved along a little bit further since then. So I definitely understand the concerns. And again, just Lane, I think you and I we've talked about it before. Patchwork Farms was a development that was done under the city of Vestavia Hills. I guess the city annexed that property, purchased that property, and then subsequently sold it off in the development stages. That was done, I guess, at the request of the Thus family that owned that property before. Just at the history behind that, the Thus family had a good relationship with then Mayor McCallum, Scotty McCallum, and they knew they no longer could own and maintain that horse farm. So they approached the city about the city purchasing that property. So there's just some history there where that was the request of the Thus family for the city of Vestavia Hills to purchase that property. So from that, there was several years of development plans that were presented. I think there was some neighborhood input meetings, part of that process. It went from the city developing it to soccer fields to, what else could we do with it? School board owned portion of the property for a while, and that just didn't work out, right? So there was other options, but I think all along the idea was to protect the creek. So the nature park you see there now was the intention of the city carving out the areas closest to the creek to protect the creek, and instituting some stormwater management plans in the development of that property to make sure wetlands were protected. So you're going to see that the apartment complex that is built now, there were definitely studies defining wetlands that were on that portion of the property. And so all of that area was conserved and preserved. You'll look at some features like our bridge that we built across the creek is an arched span bridge that has no bottom. And again, it was done with environmental components, taken into consideration, where it was not a box culvert bridge. It was a bottomless bridge, intention to protect the bottom of the creek. So I think there was a lot of conscious decisions in the development of Patchwork Farms to protect the creek. So to say that development in itself is the reason that you're now experiencing drainage concerns, I'm not sure that can be 100% accurate. I think development in the drainage basin in the drainage area itself as a whole could be contributing, but I don't think anything could be pointed directly at just the Patchwork Farms development. The drainage area, I think there was mention maybe you guys were going to do some hydraulic analysis or talk to someone about doing some studies for you, but the drainage basin in the creek is it's a large area, and it includes a lot more than just City of Vestavia Hills properties, right? So I don't know if there's an analysis as a whole that would help you analyze some of your questions about what all is draining to the creek, what could be contributing to drainage problems that you're experiencing now, and how has that changed within recent years compared to what what was done before, that's definitely something I'm willing to continue to discuss with you. And if there is somebody specifically that you've got doing those reviews with you, I can definitely contribute as best as possible I can to that study and that analysis.
So part of my goal today is to learn what is sort of in scope and what is out of scope for the city of Vestavia Hills. And so I just want to confirm what I'm hearing from you, Christopher, that the analysis of the drainage basin as a whole is something that you believe is not in scope for Vestavia Hills. That's not your responsibility. Is that correct?
Let me further define that, I guess, to just make sure I understand. So there are properties that are in Vestavia Hills municipal limits that are within that drainage basin. There are many more properties maybe that are not in Vestavia Hills municipal limits that are in that drainage area. That was my statement. So I think you've got properties that are in City of Birmingham municipal limits that drain to the creek. I think you have a lot of unincorporated Jefferson County properties that drain to the creek. And I think you may have a small portion of some properties that might be in the city of Mountain Brook that drain to the creek. So that was kind of my point of that statement.
Okay. And so as far as your scope, or if you can help me, because we're trying to learn and figure out how to address this, right? The end goal of this is to prevent increased property damage and ideally, reduce some of the problems that we're seeing if there's some, way to make that happen as well. And so can you help me understand, knowing that this is a multi-jurisdictional drainage basin, who or how that overall drainage basin impact analysis would be performed? Who is the appropriate governing body to look at that from a multi-jurisdictional perspective?
I think it would have to be a private study. Now, if you're asking for a municipality or someone to assist with that, I think you could go to each individual municipality, and I think they could probably contribute. But I would and contribute as in providing knowledge or development plans or anything else that might be within our municipal limits. But I don't know that I could go to the city of Birmingham for you and ask for drainage plans for the summit. So I do know the summit, a portion of the summit's at the top of this drainage basin and does drain into the creek. I don't know that I would be the one to go to the city of Birmingham to ask you for drainage plans for the summit. I think that might be either an individual engineer representing your interest that would then go to the city of Birmingham, or maybe you reaching out directly to the city of Birmingham to ask for that level of information. So that would be just my nature of my response to what it sounds like I think you're asking for.
Okay. And there's not like a regional or state level group that has jurisdiction over this that you're aware of?
No. So the way stormwater management works, each city or each municipality has its own what's called MS4 permit. So we have a permit with the state to own and operate a drainage system. So with that, there are certain permit requirements. We have what's called MS4 permit requirements. And so that's what dictates our erosion control ordinance, and again, a lot of things have even changed since patchwork was developed, right? Patchwork was developed prior to 2017, 2018. 2018, the city got a new permit from ADEM, a new MS4 permit that has a lot more restrictions, I guess, maybe regulations that we are responsible for enforcing now. Again, sorry, I've got another call coming in here. 2018, we adopted new ordinances, and specifically ordinances that are related to post-construction BMP requirements. Am I still on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. 2018, we adopted a post-construction BMP requirement. That is stating what a development has to do after construction. So you have your erosion control ordinance and things that dictate during the construction period. The post-construction ordinance is telling developments that you must account for any increase and runoff from your site after construction, you must capture and treat that runoff and allow some of that water to absorb back into the ground to mimic pre-development conditions. So those are things that we have in place now that we did not have in place prior to 2018. Most cities have that in place now. I know City of Mountain Brook does. City of Birmingham has gone a step above. City of Birmingham has gone even beyond the basic MS4 permit requirements and has developed an even more detailed stormwater management program. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to the City of Birmingham folks and get some information about that, what they now require, because I think that would pertain to any redevelopment of the AT&T site. So again, majority of that site is in the City of Birmingham. I'm not familiar with what's planned for redevelopment on that property, because again, it's in majority of it's in the City of Birmingham. I would definitely encourage you to reach out to those folks and just find out what's planned from a stormwater management standpoint for that development. So
Okay, that makes sense. That's clear, and I appreciate that information and guidance. I would ask, maybe just as a follow-up after this call, and maybe it's something Lori Beth could help with, but if you could point us to the 2008, the new regulations, I think it'd be good for everyone to take a look at that and understand what those BMPs are. I'm sure they're on the site somewhere.
Absolutely, yeah. And I wanted to share with the group, I didn't know if you guys were familiar with our stormwater management program webpage off the city website, but yeah, definitely encourage you to look at that. That definitely shows you what we've developed again is the City of Vestavia Hills stormwater management program, and it definitely goes into a lot of details of what we look at now, specifically related to post-construction. Encouraging green infrastructure, low impact development. I know that's a big topic, and that's definitely something that again, even prior to 2018, we had rewritten, and Patchwork Farms was developed in mind for it to have a lot of green space, to encourage, pervious parking areas and those type things. So a lot of that was incorporated into the redevelopment of Patchwork Farms. And now we've got ordinances in places that basically require that of new development. So,
okay. So that's really helpful. We have so I think that addresses, and clearly we're going to need to do some additional things outside of this. It sounds like we can count on your help for the things related to Vestavia Hills. But for us to get a view of the entire basin and how that's affecting us, then we'll need to reach out to these other jurisdictions. I know we have some general, concerns about silting, and at this point there is no, we're not reporting an active issue, but if you could just really quick for everyone's benefit, since silting is such a major issue, can you just kind of walk us through, if we begin to see silting in the river, what's the appropriate response to that? What can we expect, from the City of Vestavia Hills around that? Help us understand.
yeah, sure. If it's related to an active construction site, then yes. And if it's a site that's permitted within the City of Vestavia Hills, yes, we definitely have mechanisms in place. One of the things, prior to 2018, we were somewhat limited in our inspection capabilities, but with our 2018 ordinance, we now have a full-time stormwater inspector that works for the City of Vestavia Hills. So if you see an issue that you think might be in the City of Vestavia Hills municipal limits, definitely let us know, report it to us, me, Lori Beth, through our action center or other means to get our attention. Jay Turner's our inspector. He'll go out and review it, see what the source of it might be, and do what we can do to enforce our ordinances and our provisions to get it corrected as soon as possible. Again, just keep in mind that a lot of that drainage basin is not in the City of Vestavia Hills, right? So there'll just be limits to what we can do at the city level, but getting in touch with other municipalities or someone else that might be responsible for inspecting those other sites is definitely something that we would do as well too. So just keep in mind the other problems, siltation, like I think anyone would tell you, if siltation really calls from a construction site runoff issue, or is it just scouring the creek banks and creek creek bed itself. So I guess there's just a lot of undetermined factors. Is that siltation really a result of an active construction site, or is it more of a scouring process? So again, that's something our new ordinances take into account, right? Is trying to decrease the amount of runoff going into the creek and having more water being absorbed into a site, even if it's being redeveloped. So that's something I think our ordinances, again in place since 2018, are trying to address issues like that. So.
Okay. I think there is one particular property, since you're focusing on the jurisdiction. I'm curious, have you inspected the Altadena Park and the stormwater, infrastructure in that park recently? Or is that something
Altadena,
that?
Well, let's make sure. So Altadena Park itself, or are we talking about that area? Just
the one owned by the city of Vestavia Hills.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with it. Right now, there are no stormwater management features that I know of that had been constructed part of a park project. I think it was just land basically that we've acquired from the golf course. Is that the area you're talking about?
Well, so the entire drainage basin we've been discussing goes through that park.
Yes. Okay.
And so
I wouldn't
there
disagree
are,
with that. Yeah. So
yeah,
it goes through the lake. The lake has an overflow structure, spillway, and yes, that does drain through the park.
right. So are you familiar with some of the undercutting, erosion, and other destabilization that's happening with that in the park? Is that something you all have had a chance to inspect and explore?
I have not. I have not walked that property probably in quite a while. But if there's something going on, yeah, I can definitely talk to our maintenance guys about it.
Okay. Yeah, we reported it, I guess, a couple months ago, and there's currently, rebar and caution tape. But there's a significant amount of erosion occurring, undercutting of the spillway, and it's putting silt into the river. So maybe that's something we could connect with Jay Turner on. Would like to get him out there, perhaps.
Yeah, and just keep in mind, we're responsible for inspecting construction projects. So again, if it's an ongoing, existing, just property maintenance concern, that wouldn't necessarily be Jay's responsibility, but we can absolutely review it and discuss it. So absolutely, if it's an issue going on city-owned property, yeah, absolutely, we'll address it. It just may be with maintenance staff as opposed to Jay's inspection. So.
Okay, thanks for that. I know I asked a lot of the initial questions. So I'm going to give the rest of the neighborhood a chance here to kind of share what's on their mind and try to get information on other specific topics.
I've got just a couple quick questions, kind of reflecting on maybe the context that both DJ and Christopher have built in terms of the basin. So trying to maybe frame it in the same context, would you agree that when we say 10-year period, that the city of Vestavia is the primary developer of the basin in the last 10 years? I know that there's other municipalities involved, but the scale of Patchwork Farms, the amount of earth moved, the impervious surfaces, do you think that Vestavia is the primary developer of that area over the last 10 years and what it has done to that basin? There's a strong correlation?
I would say that Patchwork Farms is probably the most recent significant development in that area. I'm not as familiar with the Colonnade and what may have been built in the Colonnade area and the dates of those. Again, those were not our municipal limits. I do know there was a significant apartment complex built right at the corner of Acton Road and Cabo River Road that's in the city of Birmingham. That's not in the city of Vestavia Hills. So I can't say that Patchwork Farms is the only thing that's been developed within the past 10 years, but would probably be one of the most significant things. Sure.
All right, and then secondly, do you believe that the Altadena Creek is at capacity or above capacity when we have stormwater events, like as recent as yesterday?
Yeah, I would say that I have not done any type of capacity analysis of the creek. So does the water get up and does it leave the creek banks? I think I've observed that. So if you're saying that's at capacity and overflowing, then yes, I would agree. It's been noted that yes, it leaves its creek banks.
Does that concern you as an engineer that if we're connecting the dots, you've potentially done oversight over the most development in this region in the last 10 years, the creek is above or beyond its normal capacity? That's kind of that's the crux of my conversation I'd like to address with you. If we all recognize that Vestavia is doing most of this development with your oversight, and we all recognize that the creek is in a crisis stage, we must all recognize that we have to do something different than we've previously done. So that's kind of what I'm trying to talk to you about. I do understand that there's a lot of regulations and stuff, but I just want factual events like I just stated to be addressed.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything else to add. I mean, the capacity of a creek is dictated by several different things, rainfall events, as opposed, in addition to just the topography of the area. So again, saying that the creek is at capacity because of development in the area, I don't think is stating a comprehensive look at the overall picture of how a creek functions and the volume of water that it can carry.
So let me ask a question because I'm just curious. Again, just trying to learn here. If we know that the creek is at capacity, are we confident that the BMPs and the regulations and ordinances that Vestavia Hills has in place guarantees that less water will be exiting all new development than what's currently happening prior to development? Does that question make sense? That we're not continuing to put additional water into the creek as we continue development.
I don't think there's any guarantee. I think the intent of our new ordinances are, yes, to say that any new development is intended to mimic pre-development conditions as best as possible. So I think that's pretty much the exact language that's in our permits and in our requirements, is that their design engineer has to show and demonstrate as best as possible that their post-construction condition is going to mimic pre-development conditions as best as possible. So that's not to say that what you've been experiencing, what we've had out here these past 2 days, might be classified as a 25-year rain event, and that's caused some perceived capacity problems, when tomorrow we might receive that 100-year rain event, and you're going to have even larger problems. So again, I don't think there's any kind of catch-all, end-all guarantee that you're never going to see a more significant rain event that's going to cause more potential property damage or more potential harm than what you did yesterday.
So what is the standard that they're supposed to engineer to? Is it a 1-year rain event, a 1-month rain event? Like when we ask them to demonstrate that it's not putting more out there, is that a 500-year rain event, right? What is that?
There's various levels. So the way our permit is written is that they must capture and treat that 1.1 inch rainfall, that first flush. And again, that's the idea behind more of a water quality type thing. Typically a detention pond or something like that is designed to capture the 25-year rain event. But our standards, the way we've worded it before, we want the engineer to at least analyze that 25-year and that 100-year rain event, what is going to go on with those rain events. Typically, when you have those types of rain events, it doesn't really matter what's going on any potential one site. It's what's happening in the drainage basin as a whole. But typically it's the 25-year rain event that you've got to show that you're capturing and controlling that rain event. So
where can we find a definition of what that 25-year rain event is? Is that in the ordinance?
I think any engineer probably could give you a general definition of what a 25-year rain event, and it varies by basins, right? So it varies by area. So what would be analyzed as a 25-year rain event in the Altadena area may be different than what may be analyzed for a site that may be in northern Birmingham or somewhere else. So
Sure.
again, that's a hydraulic analysis that has to be done, part of the development to analyze what's going on with your site and your conditions. So
Right, but that standard, like you would expect all the engineers to follow the same standard, the same data set, so that they can't just pick and choose what they want to define a 25-year rain event as, right? So
that's right.
What is the standard data source that the city of Vestavia Hills requires engineers to use in those calculations?
Yeah, and I'd have to go back before I would quote that. I just don't have that written in front of me right now. But there are some standards adopted that we look at that the engineer provides, and we review that.
Okay, yeah, if we could take that as a action item for afterwards, just to share that with us. The reason is I would like for the neighborhood to be aware of what amount of rain is being engineered for, right? When we see those designs coming across, that they understand, relative to the rainfalls that we're seeing, what those detention and retention ponds and swales and everything else is being designed to capture and hold.
Sure.
I think that's fair, right, for them to understand that. Okay. So we're trying to ensure a 25-year rain event is the point at which more water gets introduced to the creek. And is that both volume and velocity?
What's particularly looked at is volume, but the velocity is taken into consideration to reduce that velocity at the discharge point. Again, the idea behind a detention pond is to capture that volume and slow down that velocity as well. But it's hard to just quantify that velocity. Again, it's based off that discharge rate from the site during that particular rain event. So again, there's typically something done, to help reduce that velocity, to dissipate that energy of any water leaving that site before it enters the creek. So.
Okay. I always have more questions, but I want to be respectful of our other neighbors and give them a chance to ask other questions. Lane, I think you had a follow-up, or Mike, Claude. What else would you like to know?
Hey, Wes.
All right, I'll jump in and feel free to, take the next one then. So I'm going to ask a very particular question because, again, I'm just trying to learn. But this was raised by multiple neighbors. So the Reserve at Patchwork Farms apartment complex has a large retention or detention pond. I'm not, a civil engineer, so I'll probably get the terminology incorrect. It's been observed that pond has significant growth occurring both inside and on the banks of that. Can you just speak briefly to the maintenance requirements for those types of structures and who is responsible for enforcing the maintenance of those?
Yeah, that question's for me, obviously, I guess, and I thought I was hearing Wes Klein ask a question as well, too. Did he get cut off, or did you supplement his question?
I did not hear him. I'm so sorry if I cut him off.
Yeah. So the Reserve apartments were developed prior to our current ordinance. So I'll say that anything developed prior to our current ordinance is purely, responsibility and maintenance of that property owner. Now, the city does not have any maintenance or any inspection responsibilities or those type of things per our per the ordinances that those were developed under. Now, our current ordinances as of 2018 clearly has some defining factors in there that a property owner continues to be responsible for maintaining any stormwater facilities on their site. But in addition to that, they must continue to prove to the city that they are maintaining them and they are keeping them in operating conditions the way they were designed. So we have an annual reporting requirement for any new stormwater facility that those homeowners, and should it be a new subdivision, it would be a homeowners association, would be responsible for completing reports that the facility is being maintained and still accomplishing what it was designed to accomplish. So we require those to be submitted to the city on an annual basis.
All right. And so for the structures pre-2018, when there are signs that they're not being properly maintained, what is the correct approach here? Knowing obviously that allowing, stormwater and siltation issues is not something anybody would like to see.
Yeah, and so then it would fall back to a property maintenance concern. So I think some of that could be, reviewed by the city to see if it is actually neglect of a property owner of not maintaining their facility. I don't know that the city would have a mechanism in place being able to state that it is no longer accomplishing the stormwater requirement that it was intended to do, because we just did not have that requirement in place at the time those sites were permitted. But it's definitely within your means of going to that property owner and say, hey, what's going on with your property is damaging my property. So I think that's within every property owner's rights to say, hey, something that you've got going on your property is causing me damages, and surely there's some avenue that you could seek in that regard. So.
Okay, and so if we were seeking the city of Vestavia Hills to have specific recourse, that would require an ordinance, a change to the current code?
Our current code for any new development post 2018 does have some city requirements in there to provide those inspections and provide those reports that the development does continue to maintain their stormwater features.
Right, but for that to be for that to apply to previous developments prior to 2018, that would require a change to the City of Vestavia Hills Code.
That would be correct.
Okay. All right, I'm going to let Wes ask his question. For some reason, I couldn't hear him.
Cut off.
Hey, I couldn't.
We get dropped.
Yes, I think it's the